जिसको देख करके हमारा सीना चौड़ा हो जाए, गर्व से हम उसका नाम ले सकें। इस आदमी को मैं महान मानता हूं।
The people of India have decided whom they believe should be honored as the greatest Indian since 1947.
जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, भवितकु मार्गम अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, भवितकु मार्गम अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर।
The Indian village is not a single social unit. The two major divisions are between the touchables and the untouchables.
टीचर अंबेडकर, మా బతుకు ఫ్యూచర్ अंबेडकर, మా దారికి టార్చ్ अंबेडकर, భారత్ కు మార్క్స్ अंबेडकर। మా వల్లో టీచర్ अंबेडकर, మా బతుకు ఫ్యూచర్ अंबेडकर, మా దారికి టార్చ్ अंबेडकर, భారత్ కు మార్క్స్ अंबेडकर। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेత अंबेडकर, బడుగులకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर, భారత్ కు మార్క్స్ अंबेडकर। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर, भारत को मार्क्स अंबेडकर।
Unfortunately, I was born a Hindu untouchable. It was beyond my power to prevent that. But it is within my power to refuse to live under these humiliating conditions. Though I was born a Hindu, I solemnly assure you that I will not die as a Hindu.
Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar answer! Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar answer!
కులానికి శూలం అంబేద్కర్, మతానికి మందుర అంబేద్కర్, మనువుకు మరణం అంబేద్కర్, మానవత మూర్తి అంబేద్కర్। కులానికి శూలం అంబేద్కర్, మతానికి మందుర అంబేద్కర్, మనువుకు మరణం అంబేద్కర్, మానవత మూర్తి అంబేద్కర్। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर, भारत को मार्क्स अंबेडकर। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर, भारत को मार्क्स अंबेडकर।
We believe that no matter who you are or where you come from, every person can fulfill their God-given potential. Just as a Dalit like Dr. Ambedkar.
భూమకై కోరితే అంబేద్కర్, భూములను పంచితే అంబేద్కర్, పరిశ్రమల వాడా అంబేద్కర్, ప్రగతి జన సూత్రం అంబేద్కర్। భూమకై కోరితే అంబేద్కర్, భూములను పంచితే అంబేద్కర్, పరిశ్రమల వాడా అంబేద్కర్, ప్రగతి జన సూత్రం అంబేద్కర్। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर, भारत को मार्क्स अंबेडकर। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर, भारत को मार्क्स अंबेडकर।
जिसको देख करके हमारा सीना चौड़ा हो जाए, गर्व से हम उसका नाम ले सकें।
The greatest Indian since 1947, since the Mahatma as chosen by the viewers, B.R. Ambedkar.
అంబేద్కర్, అపులుగుల చాడ అంబేద్కర్, ప్రేమికుల స్వప్నం అంబేద్కర్, పేదలకు రాజ్యం అంబేద్కర్, మా ఇంటి నీడ అంబేద్కర్, అపులుగుల చాడ అంబేద్కర్, ప్రేమికుల స్వప్నం అంబేద్కర్, పేదలకు రాజ్యం అంబేద్కర్।
ప్రభుత్వం అనేది టు సీ ద వెల్ఫేర్ ఆఫ్ ది డౌన్ ట్రాడన్ అధ్యక్ష.
जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, भवितकु మార్గం अंबेडकर, బడుగులకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर। जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर, जगत जननेता अंबेडकर, भवितकु మార్గం अंबेडकर,
appreciate your presence with us. We are here, of course, to celebrate the 126th anniversary of Dr. Ambedkar, and we are united in believing that he was a very great man of huge significance to India, but also to the wider world for his work in relation to the Indian Constitution and more generally against discrimination and human rights. We have a range of speakers, and I will introduce the speakers as we come to them. I will have to ask the speakers, please, to keep very strictly to time, if you would. I think Dr. Ambedkar ought to be as well known as Mahatma Gandhi, but he is not yet. But nevertheless, year by year, I think his profile is getting more publicity. And this year there are events, I think, around the country celebrating his birthday, and there is an annual meeting, as we know, to celebrate his birthday in Parliament. I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction. And I will ask Santosh on my right briefly to indicate the format for this meeting.
Before I indicate the format, I'd just like to say a few words. Lord Harris, Lord Parrick, Lord Alton, and distinguished guests, thank you for attending the meeting. Lord Harris, thank you particularly for hosting this meeting of the Federation of Ambedkarites and Buddhist Organisations UK Parliament this year. This marks Dr. Ambedkar's 126th birth anniversary, and this is the 4th time that you've hosted such a meeting, and we're all grateful for all your support in helping celebrate and promote the legacy of Dr. Ambedkar in the UK Parliament. And I welcome all of you here on behalf of FABO UK. Now, key FABO UK events. This key event follows the one at the High Commission on the 14th of April, and a concert by Mr. Rajesh Dabra and his wife, Dr. Bhavna Dabra. Rajesh is sitting here and Bhavna is sitting over there, both of whom are here today, and they performed some beautiful songs about the life and works of Dr. Ambedkar and dedicated the concert to him, so we're grateful for that. Alongside these events, we're making excellent progress with the refurbishment of the house that Dr. Ambedkar lived in from 1921 to 1922 in Primrose Hill, and we have Bonnie Dobson, who actually lives on the same road as Dr. Ambedkar used to live. And we're making very good progress because FABO UK have been pushing at every opportunity the government of Maharashtra to make progress with the refurbishment of the house. We want it to become a fully functioning memorial and a resource centre to Dr. Ambedkar. And the house that is spread over 4 floors hopefully will be complete by the end of the year, and it will be open to the public all the time, which I think would be a dream come true and a dream realised for FABO UK. And spreading the word of Dr. Ambedkar's life and work is very important. And there are enough who would like no mention of his great achievements, and those who would diminish his work and legacy and would assign him to being just a leader of the untouchables. So the work that people like Rajesh is doing, the work that FABO is doing, and this is having a significant impact on our important work here. And of course, spreading the message beyond the Indo-Pakistani diaspora is vital. And so I'm delighted that I have a new generation of children and young people who are learning about Dr. Ambedkar and his significance as a great social reformer. Now, this is going to be a defining year as we continue to work on the annihilation of caste. And coming back to the format of the meeting, we've got a very, very tight agenda. I think copies of it are being shared around. We have a number of members of the Lords here who are going to speak. So I would just ask people just to make sure you have your phones switched off, and the speakers. Richard is a very, very strict timekeeper. So if you go over your 10 minutes or your allotted time, he will stop you. So on that note, I will hand you over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Santosh. Well, I think you've been given us a good example with a very disciplined opening. It's now my pleasure to introduce David and Adam Sulik, who are going to talk about the relevance of Dr. Ambedkar to school children in the UK. So, where are these two gentlemen, I wonder? I thought they might be over there. Welcome, over to you.
Lord Harries, Lord Parekh, Lord Alton, Santosh Das, FABO UK, and distinguished guests, thank you for allowing me and my brother Adam to speak at this important event to mark Dr. Ambedkar's 126th birth anniversary. We are very excited to be here in the home of parliamentary democracy for the first time. My name is David Sulik. I am 13 years old and I am in Year 9 at Alexandra Park School near Muswell Hill in North London. Adam and I have grown up with both British and Czech culture. Our father is British and our mother is from the Czech Republic. Until recently, all we knew about India was from watching Top Gear India special with Jeremy Clarkson. But thanks to Santosh, we are learning about Dr. Ambedkar and the great things he did for the Indian people. We also watched a BBC documentary presented by Simon Reeve called Sacred River about the holy river Ganges. We were amazed by the richness of Indian culture, but we were also shocked to learn that discrimination against people known as untouchables from the lowest castes still exists. As the programme explained, on the one hand, India is a very modern country with advanced technology and its own space programme, but even to this day, some people in India are afraid to walk in the shadow of an untouchable person. Dr. Ambedkar was born in one of the most deprived communities in India and had many achievements during his lifetime. He campaigned strongly against social discrimination towards untouchables, now sometimes called Dalits. Perhaps Dr. Ambedkar's greatest achievement was to draft India's constitution, which was adopted in 1949. The constitution secures for all its citizens justice, social, economic and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. The Constitution also outlawed the practice of untouchability in India. We have learned that Dr. Ambedkar was a man of many talents. He was also an economist, politician and social reformer. He helped improve women's rights and reduce the daily working hours for workers. And at the end of his life, he became a Buddhist and helped revive Buddhism in India. Personally, I am very interested in history both of this country and the Czech Republic. During the Second World War and under communism, people in Czechoslovakia had very poor human rights. In 1989, the Velvet Revolution took place, and Czechoslovakia became a free country once more, led by Václav Havel, who became president. Havel's political philosophy was one of humanitarianism, environmentalism, civil activism, and direct democracy. I think there are many similarities between Havel's political and social reform and Dr. Ambedkar's. At school, we have learnt about Dr. Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but we have never heard the name Dr. Ambedkar mentioned anywhere in our classes. Perhaps it is time to do something about it. India is one of the greatest and most important countries on earth, after all. Finally, we would like to congratulate Santosh on the fantastic job she has been doing, not only to promote greater understanding about the life and work of Dr. Ambedkar, but also the campaign she has been involved with for many years to outlaw caste discrimination in this country.
My name is Adam Sulik. I'm 11 years old and I'm in Year 6 at St Gilda's Roman Catholic Junior School in Crouch End in North London. David and I are pleased the Indian government has bought the London house where Dr. Ambedkar lived from 1921 to 1922. We look forward to visiting the Ambedkar house very soon with our school friends and learning more about Dr. Ambedkar. It is clear to David and I that Dr. Ambedkar was a great social reformer and a great civil rights movement leader. We think Dr. Ambedkar deserves to be on UK school curriculum too. Thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed. And I hope that your message that Dr. Ambedkar needs to be taught in schools as one of the great human rights heroes for every culture, not just Indian culture. And I understand that it's one of your birthdays recently, so happy birthday, I think.
Happy birthday.
I think we will go straight on to Rob, how very good to see you. Welcome, please see. And you come in as not only as yourself, but as a kind of incarnation of Lord Alton as well, because he was due to speak at this point. Would you like to speak at some point?
I'm quite happy to, perhaps not immediately. No.
Take a break. Well, let's ask Santosh then to speak. Santosh, as well as what you know about her work with the Federation, is Vice Chair of the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance, and she's going to talk about some of the work that they're involved in at the moment.
I'm going to just thank you, Lord Harris. I'm just going to focus on the UK government's consultation on the caste discrimination law, or to outlaw caste-based discrimination. The UK government has been developing law to prohibit caste-based discrimination since 2010, and Rob sitting there was one of the first people who was involved with us and got us engaged with the then Labour government to make this happen. As a result, we got Section 95A within the Equality Act. But anyway, this has been a result of the robust lobbying by organisations, by a number of key organisations over a decade. And in 2013, legislation under the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act made the inclusion of caste as an aspect of race in the Equality Act 2010 a duty. So whilst before it was like the government may do something, it made it a duty for, Parliament made it a duty for government to implement the law on caste discrimination. However, the government has not complied with this duty to date, and at present, therefore, the Equality Act does not expressly prohibit discrimination on the grounds of caste. And this has made it difficult for those facing caste-based discrimination to get legal redress. On the 28th of March last month, the government launched the long-awaited consultation. And we have been waiting eagerly for this because we thought that the consultation was part of the beginning of the implementation of the law. Sadly, it's not that. The online point that the Government's Equality Office states is that this consultation is about how to ensure that there is appropriate and proportionate legal protection against unlawful discrimination, persons' origins, with due consideration given to how such protection would be implemented in practice. Now, we're taken back by that. In the first paragraph of the foreword, the government states, given that the consultation is generally about what should be unlawful, and they say that we want to eliminate any unlawful discrimination, we ask, it's not for the government to try and second-guess Parliament by consulting on a question that Parliament has already clearly answered, and they did that in 2013. Now, given that Parliament has expressed directions on legislation, we believe that the consultation should have been how best to legislate, as was originally directed in 2013. And instead, the consultation presented now by government is asking us to choose between a preferred primary option of developing case law, which takes years and years and is very costly, and then the second best option, which is agreeing with the Parliament's direction to legislate. The focus and positioning of option 1, which is go for case law, shows clear bias. The consultation is skewed towards case law, and if they, the government, they're playing with loaded dice. And some of this bias occurs throughout the grossly misleading statements made in the initial pages, which are more likely to be read and thus form opinions rather than later on. And I have to say that in all my 25 years of working in a Whitehall government department and Whitehall government departments, I've never come across such biased, misleading statements from a government department. And the consultation is clearly rigged against us. 7 organisations, the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance, Caste Watch UK, the Dalit Solidarity Network UK, Federation of Ambedkarites and Buddhist organisations, the National Secular Society, South Asia Solidarity Group, and the Voice of Dalit International, who have all been at the forefront of the campaign for legal protection against caste discrimination, and together with support from some leading academics have sent a letter to the minister responsible for this consultation, and we wrote on the 19th of April. And in the letter, I just want to quickly go through some of the key points that we made. And we said that we're alarmed by the significant lack of argument in favour of the legislation. We said that we note the omissions of the most important consideration of all, and that is the ease and speed and precision with which legislation could be enacted under a ministerial order. All they need to do is just introduce a ministerial order, the legislation would be implemented. And we said that we note the omissions of reference to international obligations as recommended by the United Nations Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD, repeated last year, calling for immediate implementation of the legislation to outlaw caste discrimination. And Nave Pillay, the previous UN High Commissioner, at an ACDA meeting in November 2013 in the House of Lords, chaired by the late Lord Avery, reinforced this very point. And when I attended the meeting of the UN CERD last November in Geneva on behalf of ACDA, and DSN and the IDSN were also present there, I personally stressed to UN CERD that they call on the UK government for early implementation of the law. And finally, it's shocking to read that the consultation is tainted with the rhetoric of those against the implementation of the legislation. Parliament has already passed the legislation. This is certainly not what we call good government, something that the UK government prides itself. And of course, those opposing the law have seen fit to stoop so low as to engage in personal vilifications. By chance, we have the target of one of their insults sitting here with us. And let's not forget how the same people, to keep so-called Dalits in their place, in a recently published report by the Council of Hindu Temples here in the UK, has called on the Dalits in a very patronising way. And let me just quote a little paragraph from their report. And they say, "The Church of Empire drove your ancestors from their homes and trades, put them in chains and destroyed your spirit, simply because your ancestors resisted the tyrannical British colonial laws. The colonial Anglicans then declared your whole community as criminals by birth. So now we know our place and where we stand with the opposition." And if Dr. Ambedkar was alive today, he would say, as my friend Billy Quinn would say, "You're having a laugh." And even the comparatively young Sikh religion and the Guru Granth Sahib speaks about caste matters way before the British and the British traders even laid foot on Indian soil. And Dr. Ambedkar would say the British were complicit in codifying caste, for instance, for census purposes. However, they didn't create the caste system, they used it. So we have until the 17th of July to respond to the consultation in favour of implementation of the law. It is vital that we do so, And we know those who are opposing the law are busy making mischief, and we cannot let them succeed. So help us make 2017 a defining year for the annihilation of caste in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Statement, indeed. Thank you also, two people who slipped in from the household, Baroness Emma, welcome, and Lord Alton. Very glad to hear from the beginning, actually, Richard. But, sorry, I've never known you. I'm so sorry about that. I was looking around the room. I didn't see where you were.
Here all the time.
I'm getting. I'm sorry, I was looking over there.
Quite right.
No, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, David, Lord Alton is the most committed champion for human rights in Parliament. There is hardly a human rights issue that David Alton is not behind or supporting in one way or another. He's very consistent in that he doesn't pick and choose, that any violation of human rights he is willing to give his support to. And we're very glad you're here today, David, and are going to say something about Dr. Ambedkar and his relevance for us today.
Well, thank you, Richard. It was a great pleasure to be here as the infantry today, because you're the general on the floor of the House as far as the issue of caste is concerned. And it's been wonderful over the years to be able to support Richard in his battles with the government to have caste properly recognised and outlawed. But this is not a new battle. I was looking at the speech that William Wilberforce made 6 years after he'd brought about the successful abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. And he made a major speech in the House of Commons about India. He said this: having abolished the slavery system, it's now time to turn our attentions to caste. He said, it must surely appear to every heart of true British temper to be a system at war with truth and nature, a detestable expedient for keeping the lower orders of the community bowed down in an abject state of hopelessness and irremediable vassalage. It is justly, sir, he said, the glory of this country that no member of our free community is naturally precluded from rising into the higher classes in society. But it is 2 centuries later, the caste system which William Wilberforce said should be abolished, and which the British, as Santosh has said, during the colonial period, signally failed to end and often used, which still disfigures the lives of vast swathes of humanity. Caste should be recognised as a root cause of trafficking, of modern-day slavery and poverty, and until and unless we raise the profile of oppressed Dalits, nothing will change. It was Voice of Dalit International who were good enough to send me a copy of Dan Anjar Kia's admirable biography of Dr. Ambedkar, who was born into a family of untouchables in 1891. When he died in December 1956, Prime Minister Nehru adjourned the Lok Sabha for the remainder of the day, having told parliamentarians that Ambedkar had been controversial, but had revolted against something about which everyone should revolt. Dr. Ambedkar, as we heard in the magnificent contributions from David and his brother Adam earlier on, Dr. Ambedkar, the architect of the Indian Constitution, said this: untouchability is far worse than slavery, for the latter may be abolished by statute. It will take more than a law to remove the stigma from the people of India. Nothing less than the aroused opinion of the world can do it. Ambedkar's life, then, was a life of relentless struggle for human rights. He was born literally on a dunghill and condemned to a childhood of social leprosy. Ejected from hotels, barbershops, temples and offices, he faced starvation while studying to secure his education. He was elected to high political office and leadership without dynastic patronage, and to achieve fame as a lawyer and lawmaker, constitutionalist, educator, professor, economist and writer. It all illustrates for me what the human spirit can overcome. In 1927, the young Ambedkar famously led a march to the Shavdar Reservoir, a place prohibited to Dalits. On arriving at the reservoir, he bent down, cupped his hands, scooped up some water and drank, an act, of course, completely forbidden by the caste system. the Brahmins or upper caste responded by furiously pouring 108 pots of curd, milk, cow dung and cow urine into the reservoir, a ritual act which they claimed would purify the water polluted and defiled by untouchables. On a visit I made to India, I was given a small terracotta pot that I still have on the shelf of my study at home. It was given to me by the so-called untouchable. And of course, if an untouchable is drunk out of one of these terracottas, they're supposed to break it and smash it in their hand so that no one else may use it and be polluted by it. It's not the terracotta pots that need to be broken. It is the caste system that does this to the human dignity of the people we're describing and that Ambedkar campaigned on behalf of. You could get very angry about this, and Ambedkar could so easily have taken the path of terror or violent revolution, spurred on perhaps by bitter hatred or a need for revenge. But although others regarded his shadow as a sacrilege and his touch as a pollutant, he demonstrated why it's the caste system which deserves to be put beyond human touch, not the men, the women and the children condemned by it. He knew that education was the key to making progress. He said that in social relationships and the associate life of the people, we will form society. He said, if you give education, the caste system will be blown up. This will improve the prospect of democracy in India and put democracy into safe hands. While still a young man of 20, he perceptively wrote, let your mission be to educate and preach the idea of education to those at least who are near to and in close contact with you. He said that social progress will be greatly accelerated if female and male education were pursued side by side. He later insisted that we will attain self-elevation only if we learn self-help, regain our self-respect, and gain self-knowledge. India is the world's largest democracy. It is home to 1/6 of the world's population. It can be proud of its many extraordinary and amazing achievements. Like all our democracies, it's a work in progress. There are many bright spots. India produced one of the first female heads of government. A Dalit, Dr. Ambedkar, wrote the Constitution. A female Dalit became a powerful politician. A Muslim has been head of state 4 times, and a Jew who was India's great war heroes. So, yes, an astounding amount has been achieved. However, India cannot be proud of the more general fate of the Dalits, the caste system, or the extremism which feeds off ostracism and alienation and which threatens modern India. Although Dr. Ambedkar was able to have India's constitution and the laws framed to end untouchability for millions and millions of people, many of those provisions have not been worth the paper on which they were written. Ambedkar's own struggle may now be history, but caste is not. In our generation, surely it's time, and in the generation of young men like Adam and David, surely it is time to make caste history.
Thank you very much indeed, David, for that characteristically powerful and intelligent speech. We now move on to hear from Dr. Alka Shah, who is there on my right, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Anthropology at the London School of Economics, and she's going to talk on caste, tribe and inequality in contemporary India. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lord Harris, for inviting us here today and holding this occasion. Lords, distinguished guests, Ambedkarites, friends, thank you also for these very powerful speeches, Santosh Das, Lord Alton, David and Adam. What I want to do today is share with you the insights of some of the research that we've been leading in the anthropology department at the LSE, which is perhaps one of the largest programs of research in Europe and North America, looking at how and why Dalits and Adivasis remain at the bottom of Indian society today, despite the Indian economic growth. Over this time, we have seen Dr. Ambedkar being appropriated and resurrected by all kinds of forces from both the left and the right. In this context, I think that it's even more important for us to think about Dr. Ambedkar's relevance today. It's a very important question. So Some of you will recall that last year Professor Anand Teltunde at a conference on Ambedkar held at the LSE, organized by FIBO UK and supported by us, warned us about turning Dr. Ambedkar into a godlike figure. Ambedkar himself was one of the greatest iconoclasts. Professor Teltunde reminded us that the point of thinking about Dr. Ambedkar's life and works should be to imbibe his critical spirit in order to work out our strategy and tactics, and that his relevance might lie in more what he could not do than what he has done. In this spirit of Ambedkar's critical engagement with questions of human emancipation, his constant learning, evolution, and expansion that defied projecting him through any kind of snapshot, what I want to do today is to put forward two key aspects of his work and thinking which are more relevant than ever for us to develop today. The first is the relationship between caste and class in the position of low caste in contemporary India. The second is his concerns for other groups, not just Dalits, and in particular I will focus on what he led in trying to protect Adivasis, India's scheduled tribes, who are often clubbed together with India's scheduled castes, but who in fact often face different predicaments to Dalits, and who are today perhaps the most disenfranchised people in India. So to turn to the first, caste was, of course, supposed to disappear in modern India, and particularly with modernization and economic growth. Economists have, however, shown us that Indian economic growth has created increasing inequality in India, and that what is particularly notable is how Dalits and Adivasis remain worse off than all other groups. Economists, while being able to show us general patterns through their data, are less able to come up with causal processes. That, as the economist Pranab Burden long ago pointed out, is best done by anthropologists with their long-term field research. And it's with this in mind that I led at the LSE this program of research that focused on long-term ethnographic field research, living with Adivasis and Dalits in 5 different sites across the country to explore how and why low castes continued to be at the bottom of Indian society. So our field sites were all across the Indian subcontinent, looking at Tamil Dalit laborers who were working in the tea plantations of Kerala, a state known for its high human development indices, but in fact these Dalits were super exploited on these plantations. We looked at industrialization processes in Tamil Nadu, where industries were coming in and Dalit labor was being appropriated into the most polluting jobs in those industries, cleaning bones. So this was, the story of Dalits being appropriated behind economic growth in India. In Telangana, we looked at, again, the development of industrialization and how Dalit and Adivasi labor was being appropriated in the lowest rungs of the labor force in those industries. We looked at Maharashtra and the Adivasi communities there who had long fought against their displacement by large dams, but how they're also being incorporated into the lowest rungs of the economy. We looked at Adivasis and the Dalits in the Himalayas. Anyway, I don't have time to go into these rich field sites, but what we have found across them is that though old forms of village-based oppression, some of the things that you talked about, Lord Alton, have in some ways declined around lines of purity and pollution, there are few Dalits and Adivasis who have become upwardly mobile thanks to reservations which were put in place by Dr. Ambedkar. The vast majority are still occupying the lowest rungs of the labor hierarchies in the informal economy, and they're doing the jobs that others above them in the caste hierarchy will not do, and are being employed on terms and conditions that exploit and oppress them. The spread of capitalism in India has actually entrenched caste difference in the new economies, so that caste and class relations have become inseparable. And specifically, we are proposing from this research that entrenchment of social difference in the expansion of capitalism, what we are calling class casteism, takes place through 3 different kinds of processes. One is that there are inherited inequalities of power, whereby powerful outsiders, the state, locally dominant groups, continue to mediate and control resources and incorporate Adivasis and Dalits on adverse terms in the new economies. The second is the super exploitation of a seasonal migrant labor force, which is of Adivasis and Dalits, which enables capitalists to pitch ethnically and regionally different sections of the laboring classes against each other. And the last is the stigmatization and the fragmentation of low castes and classes, specifically through intergroup and gender differences, which are seeking to divide what unity might be found across these groups. So this is the subject of our forthcoming book, Ground Down by Growth, to be published later this year. And I don't have time to go into the details here. The point I wish to make is that the interrelationship between class relations and caste in contemporary India that Dr. Ambedkar spent a lot of time grappling with is more important than ever in contemporary India. And this should lead us away from an identitarian politics around Dalit identity, but also away from a Marxist analysis that does not take sufficient account of caste. As Professor Taltumde has so well put it, there is no revolution without the annihilation of caste, and no annihilation of caste without a revolution. So the second issue that I want us to draw attention to today, and that I think is particularly important given that we have a Dalit-focused audience today, is that Babasaheb Ambedkar was concerned not only with Dalits but also other minorities, in particular Adivasis, India's tribal communities who make up 8% of the population. I think this is very important as we too often focus on Dalits without considering the specific situation of Adivasis, who are in many cases, as shown not only by economists but also by our own work, in a worse situation than Dalits across the country. Now, there is some controversy about Dr. Ambedkar's stereotypes of the backwardness of these tribal communities, which doesn't actually interest me a great deal here, because in fact the Constitution of India, which he presided over, made very specific provisions for the protection of Adivasis, and in particular their land rights, that have been very important in giving them some meager form of security in an otherwise harsh economic environment into which they're inserted. Today they need to pay attention to and protect those measures that Dr. Ambedkar put in place for Adivasis through the 5th and 6th schedules of the constitutions are more important than ever, for their lands are now the target of multinational corporations, some of them British-based, and the state who want to get rid of the land protections because the greatest mineral reserves of Adivasis lie underneath their lands. So these developments are being pushed forward under the barrel of the gun at this moment in time, as vast areas of central and eastern India are surrounded by the Indian security forces being cleared of the people, and there are gross abuses of human rights taking place right now as we meet here. We get very little news about what is happening in these parts of India and the plight of the Adivasis. So I would urge us in these discussions in the House of Lords, where we are thinking about the life and works of Dr. Ambedkar, to keep open also the spaces for the concerns of the Adivasi communities as much as we do for Dalits. This was also a part of Dr. Ambedkar's missions. So to sum up, I think that Dr. Ambedkar is today more relevant than ever in his ambition away from an identitarian politics to thinking through the interrelations between class and caste, and in keeping alive concerns also for other minorities, Adivasis in particular, in a more global project of human emancipation. Thank you.
Well, once again, we've been extremely fortunate to hear such an extremely deeply felt and powerfully argued description of what is happening. Certainly, I found myself extraordinarily enlightened and challenged at the same time by what you told us. Very, very significant, and it would be very good to have your script so that it can be more widely circulated if we could. We're very fortunate now to have another very distinguished speaker, Lord Parrick, who is not only a distinguished academic as a professor of politics, distinguished parliamentarian, but he has given his name to perhaps the best known of government reports, or reports produced at the instigation of government since World War II of the world, the Parrick Report on the Future of Multiracial Britain. So his name is very well known, particularly for that report and its long-term significance. So Bika, we're very thankful.
And since I've written about it, you will forgive me if I simply summarize some of the things I've said. He was the most educated highly educated political leader of all countries anytime. Karebe, at Columbia, MA at the LSE, PhD LSE, PhD Columbia, and law at India Temple. There is no other leader in any other community who is as qualified as this. And at the same time, sorry?
DSC.
Oh?
DSC, D.Litt, Warren.
Yeah, of course, I will get multiplied. And yet he was the most underestimated leader in India. Subhash Chandra Bose, and I start with the radicals, not with the conservatives, thought of him as the hireling of the British. Gandhi didn't meet him until 1931. And when he went to see Gandhi was flying his charkha and wouldn't talk to him for about 10 minutes. And then when he raised his face, and Ambedkar looked at him, 4 eyes met, and Gandhi turned to him and said, yes, what was it about? At which point Ambedkar simply said all that he wanted to say, saying, Babuji, in this country, we are treated as worse than dogs. How can I be my home? How can it be my homeland? And Gandhi, for a while, thought that he was a Brahmin who was concerned about the plight of the untouchables. He didn't recognize him as one until he met him in the Round Table Conference in 1931. Nehru didn't meet him until much later. Now this underestimated stayed in that position and he lost elections. And the question is, why was he so systematically underestimated, although he was the most highly educated and if I may say so, the most talented in terms of his corpus of writings? Partly the caste played an important part. How can a lower caste man be so bright and intelligent? But partly I think Ambedkar himself is to blame. And you will forgive me if I do criticize him from time to time because no one is a hero. Ambedkar himself said, for example, because he was so talented, he took a very dismissive view of almost every Indian leader you can think of. He dismissed Gandhi as a charlatan. Pandit Nehru, he said, the old Brahmin boy with second-class brain. He talked about the communists as these Brahmin boys. About none of them did he have anything good to say. With the result that people felt hurt. And if they felt hurt, they naturally didn't respond to him in the spirit in which he would have liked to be there. So there are factors having to do with the Hindu society, the caste system which played their part in the underestimation of Ambedkar, but also Ambedkar himself made a generous contribution to the reasons. Now, what is it that Ambedkar's real contribution, both theoretical and practical? And I want to highlight 4 things which are extremely important. First, I think the understanding of the caste. The phenomenon of caste has baffled, as Alpana said, has baffled a lot of people. And what Ambedkar did was to ask himself a simple question. Caste symbolizes inequality. There are inequalities in all societies. How does caste differ from that kind of inequality? And secondly, why are those inequalities easily recognized? Inequality of the rich and the poor, between the rulers and the ruled. Well, this inequality is not easily recognized. And his answer, and he writes a whole book explaining this, saying caste inequality is different from other forms of inequality because it is so minutely graded that you can't have a cut-off point. There is no colonizer, there is no colonized, everybody is a colonizer, and the colonizer is also the colonized. Secondly, it's something you are born into, you can't get rid of, and it's like a corporation, you live with it. There's a corporate identity gets associated with the caste. So first, I think his contribution, I am not going to be able to summarize it, his first great contribution for me is to understand the nature, not the causes, the nature of the caste system and how it is different from other forms of inequality and therefore cannot be dismissed either a la Marx or a la Beaubourg or lots of other people. It can only be tackled in its own peculiar way. His second great contribution to me as a political theorist was the idea of fraternity. He was the first to introduce this idea into the Indian political discourse. He was very fond of French Revolution, which he studied very closely, and he said there are 3 great ideas on which India should be based: liberty, equality, fraternity. But of the 3, fraternity was far more important. And he gave example. Take a judge. He has to decide whose evidence to accept, whether to accept somebody's evidence or not. Or a policeman producing a first information report. Now he can easily, if he identifies with someone, he will try to understand him sympathetically. If he doesn't identify, he will try to dismiss him. And Ambedkar's point was this nature of, does this other person mean something to me? Is he part of my moral universe or not? If I am able to identify with him, he will mean something to me. If not, nothing will matter to me. Which is why Ambedkar asked a very simple question. Untouchability has gone on in Hindu society since the writing of Manusmriti, which is 5th century BC. For about 1500 years. How come no Hindu has ever protested strongly against it? He said, I simply can't understand any other society where people would not have protested. Why is it that in India no one stood up to protest against it? And he says they lack public conscience. Why did they lack public conscience? Because of caste. They simply couldn't see the other person as a human being. Therefore, their misfortunes of that no interest to them. And there's an absolutely fascinating analysis of the idea of fraternity in Ambedkar's writings, which is why it is through him that the word appears in the preamble to the Indian Constitution. If you read the Indian Constitution, the word preamble is, we the people of India, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity comes in. And it can be easily documented. The word fraternity was introduced by Ambedkar, and the corresponding word dignity, which also appears in the preamble. The third great contribution of Ambedkar had to do something with the future of India. He wasn't very keen on democracy. In fact, he told Gandhi, why can't you be like a Mussolini who can legislate against the caste system and get rid of it, or against the untouchability and get rid of it? He was primarily a Republican. His party was the Republican Party of India. And I think in India there is a great deal of confusion as to the difference between a democracy and a republic. The objective resolution of the Constitution of India presented to the Constituent Assembly in 1948 talks about India being a democracy. The word republic is absent. When someone questioned Panditji in the assembly saying, why the word republic absent? He said, democracy means republic. It includes republic. A few weeks later, another version of the objectives resolution appears with the word republic but not democracy. Why? Because republic includes democracy. The final draft of the Constitution says, India is a sovereign democratic republic. Why is the word republic introduced? Why is democracy not enough? Again, some of us have written about it, there are long discussions, but in Ambedkar's case, who was a keen student of the US Constitution, he introduced the word republic because republic means social equality, not just political equality. It doesn't just mean one man, one vote, it means one man, one value. Finally, I think the important thing to bear in mind is his idea of how to empower the untouchables. Now, the empowerment comes through quota, reservations, positive discrimination and all that. We know all that. The question is, Ambedkar, toward the end of his life, was deeply unhappy about it. He deeply unhappy about it. And he asked himself, how come these leaders of untouchables, who are all in Parliament, why are they not concerned about their own people? Why are they not concerned about their own community? And then in his last but one speech before he died, he said, the important thing is that the Dalits should organize, agitate, must try to understand very carefully who their representatives are, and send them to those who can be trusted to promote their interests. It's simply because somebody happens to be a Dalit, it doesn't automatically follow that he is going to pursue my interest. He hated what he called this tribe of careerists, who get a piggy ride on the Dalits, get into Parliament, get into positions, but completely kick them in the ladder and brought them there, who are simply not interested in their own people. And I think it's very important to remember how. Why? He was very firm radical in the pursuit of Dalit interest. And this interest can only be pursued if Dalits really take their destiny in their own hands, genuinely care about how they can promote their own interest. And here I want to end with a puzzle, that I've taken almost 10 minutes. Martin Luther King appears on the scene almost at the time that Dr. Ambedkar is leaving the scene, 1956. Today, wherever minorities are agitating, they turn to Martin Luther King. Wherever the oppressed people look for inspiration, they look to Martin Luther King, not to Ambedkar. who in my view was a better theoretician, a greater political figure, a greater political impact. How come Ambedkar is not mentioned in major international circles, in international journals, and people going to the issues? Whereas Martin Luther King is. Not without underestimating Martin Luther King. Why is it? And I think there is a tendency, this I must emphasize because it's quite common in India. Part of the reason why Ambedkar is not a big figure internationally, which he should be, compared to, let us say, Martin Luther King, is that the Dalits won't let go of him. Just as Bengalis for long would not let go of Tagore. Tagore was a Bengali, and that was the end of the story. Happily, Gujaratis never felt about Mahatma Gandhi. They were prepared to share him with the rest of Indians. Dalits, I think, must learn to recognize that to think of Ambedkar simply as a Dalit leader is to trap him into a mold which he rejected. If you reject caste system, you cannot simply be called just a Dalit leader. He was a great human figure, and I think once Dalit can let him go and share him with others and see him as a major human figure, I think we would not be able to get the proper measure of the man. And therefore my hope would be that on a gathering like this, we would release the spirit of Ambedkar, share him with others, and think of him as a great humanist and an emancipator leader. Thank you.
Again, another very, very fascinating, another totally fascinating. How lucky we were that Lord Parrott didn't come with a set script, because we had the benefit of a lucid summary of 4 of his books in 10 minutes.
You are giving away my secrets.
So I think I don't know whether anybody's recording that, because it would be very helpful to have it down, wouldn't it?
We're videoing it so we can transcribe it.
I think if we may, we'll transcribe that, because it would be very useful to have a record of it. And perhaps you could kindly just check it over and make sure we're not traducing anything you say. Meanwhile, also, we're glad to welcome Baroness Slava here, who slipped into the room. Sorry, Baroness Lerner's gone, but we just drop her a note, thank her for coming. I think it's good to have her. Well, now we're also very privileged because we've got a most interesting session in front of us. Mr. Rajesh Dambri, is that how it's pronounced? That is, I've got good. Is the Commissioner of Customs and Excise for India and Director General of the Ambedkar Research and Training Institute in Pune. Is that P-U-N-E? In Pune. Oh, it's in Pune. The old star Pune. The old star Pune. Right. Good. And what is also interesting about him is that he not only is an extremely distinguished civil servant, but he is a composer and a lyricist. And he and his wife, who is present with us today also, whom we very much welcome, have actually written and composed several music and songs in honour of Dr. Ambedkar, which I understand they actually showed, played and sang to the public. Was it last
on Monday?
On Monday. So I'm not sure we're going to get the songs now, are we? But we're going to certainly get Mr. Rajesh talk. So if you'd like to speak to us, the facts and challenges in India and Ambedkarite perspective.
Thank you, Lord. Lord Harris of Ambedkar, Santosh Das, President of Federation of Ambedkarite and Buddhist Organizations. 2 smart kids, David and Adam. I'm highly inspired by you. Lord Alton, Dr. Alpashar, very, very enlightening information you have given Lord Parekh. And all the distinguished guests and friends from India. It's a big honor for me and pleasure also to be present here and to share some views of mine. I'm also not prepared, but I may not be as good as Dr. Parekh was. Social harmony is a basic concept where we imagine the ambience, everybody lives in tune with each one. And the disharmony is a counterpoint, is opposite to it. A country like India, we have graded stratification, which is supported by some divine Shastras, which Dr. Ambedkar has attacked vehemently, has created a situation or a devil, a very strong devil, very powerful devil, in spite of so many kings and dynasties, laws and rules. We are not able to kill it. Basically, India also is a land of great reformers, saints. Gautam Buddha hails from the country of India. I may correct him that Dr. Ambedkar took the concept of fraternity from Lord Buddha, basically. And the Chakravarti Samrat Ashok has ruled the country on the principles of Dhamma and Tathagat, and he could create superpower out of India. As we all know, it's on record that the world economies, India had 40% of the share in world trade those days. And then we have these patriots. In the course of history, India is a greatly endowed country. It's naturally gifted with a lot of natural resources, seas, greeneries, minerals, human resource, everything. But in only during the period of Akbar or Samrat Ashok, that India could enjoy the status of superpower. Why so? It was because those kings had an inclusive policy of giving respect to all the faiths, all the sects, all the religions, and focusing on the welfare of each one, focusing on respecting the dignity of each one. The crime rate during the Ashoka's period was only 2%, literacy was 84%. I am focusing on those facts because Indian Constitution is direct replica of those principles on which India was converted into superpower. And the great soul Dr. Ambedkar studied Ashokan administrative tenets. Fortunately, he was the chairman of drafting committee. And that's how the preamble of Indian Constitution is completely based on Ashokan way of administrating the country. We, the people of India, like we enact, adopt, accept, and give to ourselves this constitution, assuring the dignity of individual, securing to all its people liberty of thought, belief, expression, faith and worship, justice, social, economic, political, and all those things. And all those things have been converted into the basic things, into fundamental right, and also directive principle of state policy, that is the framework within which country has to work. The Indian Constitution has a great promise. Country like India is a very fortunate country that somebody like Dr. Ambedkar, as all of us have shared the delicate information on him, that how he has been one of the greatest icons in the world. I would say that he was not emancipator of only Dalit, but he was emancipator of India itself. We cannot imagine India of today had there not been Dr. Ambedkar. It's the Indian Constitution which has kept country intact, integrated, successful also. Article 17 has abolished untouchability. But then, that caste system kind of thing is not going on. there is something which is very strong than the laws. There is something very fundamentally rooted in the soil of India, which is not easy to be uprooted. And sometimes we feel that you make umpteen number of laws, if they are not supported by the social systems, if they are not supported by the institutions, if they are not supported by the traditions, the mindset, the mentalities of the people, law becomes isolated. In Dr. Ambedkar's word, he himself said, it is perfectly possible to pervert the constitution if the people operating it are not perfect. That's what happens when it comes to eradicate caste. I must say on the record that Dr. Ambedkar is the only one who wrote a book on annihilation of caste. He said that the ideas on which the caste system is based need to be eradicated. Cosmetic things will not work. All other reformers have been working on eradicating the ill effect of caste system, not the caste system. He is the one who wants to eradicate caste because he says, and he was very clear in his concept, that unless you do away with your sub-identities, India that has tremendous potential to become superpower will not become. He had to be harsh, Mr. Parekh. He had to be harsh because he was such a patriot that he couldn't entertain any thought which is basically in the interest of few and not in the country. He had to be harsh on the people who are hypocrites. He was the one who was opposing Gandhiji tooth and nail because few of the thoughts of Gandhiji were not in the interest of country. I am very happy to share that I am in charge of Babasaheb Ambedkar Research and Training Institute currently on Deputation from Central India Services. And we would be taking up the exercise that what are those things which ingrain the thoughts in the younger mind to become a person with a caste mentality. What are those micro challenges where that thought goes in the mind of younger one that you are a superior caste or inferior caste. Unfortunately, we don't work on that. People grow in this environment of differentiated mindsets, and we never know that when we have become the person with the casteist mentality. There is no program. We are undertaking the research of such micro facts and realities, and we'll find out that what are those exact practices, what are those exact institutions, what are those traditions, what are those sanskars which are directly stumbling blocks to the progress of country, because with these mentalities you cannot become one, the feeling of nationhood cannot grow. The casteless society, that is Dr. Ambedkar's dream, can come into reality only when the feeling of being Indian first has to weigh larger than feeling of being anybody else. He has been saying it every now and then that I am Indian first and Indian last. And he is the only one to say it. So Dr. Ambedkar is a great patriot, a great humanitarian, the great social reformer, the constitutional expert. Who wants India to become superpower. Has to be followed, has to be followed by each one of us, at least in India. I am very sure that the researches and the data collection and the surveys which we will be undertaking shall get concluded into a nice document. We shall help Indian government to create a policy that at least in a period of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we don't create people with infected mindsets, the diseased mentalities. And if that happens, and that's how the dream of Dr. Ambedkar of casteless society and superpower will come. Thank you. Jai Bhim, Jai.
Thank you very much indeed, Rhodas. Again, another very deeply felt and important challenge, which was very, very good and important for us to hear. When do you think this research will be finished?
It will start, it will take about 2 years. It's a big work.
Big work. So something, sort of 2 or 3 years' time, we look for some out of this. Thank you very much indeed. And now we come to our final session. The person actually billed to speak, Dr. Kumar, is not able to be here. He was going to speak about the story of the man who cycled from India to Europe for love. But I'm very glad to say that his son, Fidath, is here. Welcome. Who is actually going to speak in his place. So, thank you.
I'm not big of a speaker, but I flew in from Sweden. It's fantastic to see everybody here. I think it shows the light of the journey ahead of us, I think. Both for humanity, whether it's under Dr. Ambedkar's philosophy or Buddha's philosophy. Since my name was given to me, and it's Siddharth, so I don't have to go into details about Buddha and his procedures. I think you're well aware of everything, as also people seem to be very highly motivated about researching and doing all this work and achievements, and especially the new generation taking interest of Dr. Ambedkar. I think it's extremely touching, and I think that I'm very optimistic for the future in this sense. So I just want to speak from my heart on behalf of my father. So we released a book called The Amazing Story of the Man Who Cycled from India to Europe for Love. And I can tell you a little bit of a background where I come from. And my mother comes from Swedish aristocrats. And this is what we have, we call it Riddarhuset. It's like House of Lords. But my father comes from Dalit, untouchability segment. And you can say this is what I usually say to people from press or people from BBC. We had a couple of weeks back. They asked me, what is the story about? Yeah, it's a simple love story, but if you have seen Forrest Gump and mix it with the Indian touch, you get it the hook straight away, I think. This is a story being told from my father's perspective, what he faced in India, and how love changed his life. But also Ambedkar changed his life, because he gave, Dr. Ambedkar wanted to educate India in that sense. But my father became one of them, the lucky ones, to get a scholarship in New Delhi. And he was very good at drawing. So he came to New Delhi in the 70s. But the money he was supposed to get was, as you're aware of India's corruption, ended up in some other pockets. And he ended up in the streets. I think his tough in Delhi was one of the toughest at that time. But he was very good at drawing. So he made his money doing portraits of people. And this talent made him a good friend of Indira Gandhi. And later also Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first lady in space, a Russian cosmonaut. The Congress Party gave him permission to sit in Connaught Place to do portraits. At that time, he has always had this prophecy. You know, you have this kind of astrology happening in Hindu culture. So the prophecies say he's a Capricorn and they will not need to arrange marriage for him. His wife will come from faraway land and be Taurus sign, musical, and own jungle. And this was his only hope. But one evening, he met this beautiful lady that sits in this description of this prophecy he had in his early years. And this was my mother, a Swedish aristocrat who drove 19 years old from Sweden to India with a Volkswagen bus in the hippie trade. And this is kind of, I don't go into much of the details, you can read the book, but what happened, you can buy the book as well. But what happened after some years of lettering, my father sold what he had, and it was not much, but he had $80 in his pocket and a bicycle, and he took the same route to follow, and it took him almost 5 months. So I'm very happy that I'm sitting here with you. It's been 42 years, and I'm the result of it. Thank you.
A living tribute.
Yeah.
Yes, now. Yes, we're finishing at past, and there's also Rob to say something as well, yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, no, please do. David first.
Well, you know, what I would like to say is, thank goodness somebody has pointed their finger at Manusmriti. I mean, that is a vile part of our Hindu scriptures. Because not only does it say things about caste, but it says things about women. And in fact, when I have said something about how women are treated, I've had Manusmriti quoted to me online, you see. And I think that is really, really serious. And I can't understand why the Hindus are still hanging on to. There's so much good stuff in Hinduism. Why do they hang on to things which are not for today? And that to me sounds great. And there's also something else which Baba Sahib said about if the women are not looked after, then we will have no progress. And women are not looked after in India at all. And there are millions of children who are not being educated. I mean, the schools are there, but there are no teachers in them. Children go there, but there are no teachers. I mean, it is a very serious situation as to what's going on in India. I mean, on the surface, it all looks very good, and we have schools for children. But if there's no teacher, you don't have a school. If you have a health center, and you don't have a doctor or a nurse, you don't have a health center. And these are all government paid. And until people start seeing some responsibility for themselves, and I think caste and treatment of women are the two things which are real black marks against the Hindus. And I have a very big problem with that. And I'm a great admirer of Baba Sahib, but that's not the point. The point is, what are we doing about what you believed in?
Yeah, absolutely right. And Bob, would you like to?
I'll say a few words, yeah, I will, Richard. If you walk 200 metres down the road here to Lambeth Bridge, there's a big building which is the Northern Ireland office. And I spent 3 years in the Northern Ireland office from 2007 to 2010. And so I know a bit about Northern Ireland. And it's the best parallel for people in the United Kingdom who don't understand casteism to look at Northern Ireland, because until the early 70s there was discrimination against the Catholic community in Northern Ireland in terms of the electoral boundaries, in terms of job opportunities, in terms of schooling. And even now, when you go to Northern Ireland, I'm not saying I can always do this, I'm not from Northern Ireland, but when you go to Northern Ireland, if you know the area well, you can tell whether someone is from the Catholic community or the Protestant community. And people from Northern Ireland, just as people in the Indian subcontinent very often know what they would almost think instinctively what caste someone's from. In Northern Ireland, you can tell whether someone's from the Catholic community or the Protestant community from the way they look, sometimes from the way they dress, from the way they talk, from the schools they went to, from their names. And the reason I say that is because most people in this room looking around, I suspect, know the subcontinent far better than I do. But I know the United Kingdom as well as anyone in this room. I'm not saying better, but as well as. And if you're trying to explain to the Gora community what casteism is about, talk about Northern Ireland. Talk about Northern Ireland as a parallel. It's not nearly as insidious as casteism, but it is to do with that. You speak to someone for a minute and you know what their background is. Just as people in this room, most of whom are resident in the United Kingdom, I suspect, if you are from a subcontinental background, when you visit the subcontinent, however you dress, however you speak, within 30 seconds, they know you're NRI and a rich foreigner. They know that. You know, how, they just do, don't they? And it's those things. Now, I spent several years as a trustee of the Dalit Solidarity Network, and I did, as Santosh Das says, I did push Labour government, I'm a Labour member of Parliament, to introduce the legislation in the Equalities Act, which became the Equality Act 2010. But the Labour government kept saying, we want the evidence. And we kept saying, and Jeremy Corbyn was very involved in this, as also a trustee and a chair of the Dalit Solidarity Network. Look, we don't have to produce evidence of caste-based discrimination in the United Kingdom. We think it's there. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. But it's wrong. There should not be caste-based discrimination in the United Kingdom in the provision of goods and services or in employment. And great if it doesn't exist. Why not put it on the statute books? And the Labour government said, well, we'll put it on the statute books, but we won't introduce it. And this is quite commonly done with laws. It's written in the law, but it doesn't actually become the law of the land until a sort of declaration is made by Parliament that it's the law of the land. So it is on the statute book in Section 9 or whatever it is of the Equality Act 2010. And then we have the coalition government came in and people got excited and so on. And as Santosh Das eloquently said, we're now back to the situation where the outgoing government, the Conservative government, is consulting not on when to bring in that legislation, but whether or not to bring it in. As you say, Baroness, if to bring it in. Now, this is, to say the least, extremely disappointing. And the Prime Minister, Theresa May, as you will all know, used to be the Home Secretary. And she took through Parliament, and she frequently, quite rightly, praises herself for the Modern Slavery Act. Well, the evidence that there's modern slavery in the United Kingdom is about as strong as the evidence that there's caste-based discrimination. So if we can have one, quite rightly, the Modern Slavery Act, why can't we have the other, the declaration that what is on the statute book will become the law of the land? And it is to do with discrimination in employment and discrimination in the provision of goods and services. If people want to advertise on dating websites, wedding websites, matchmaking websites, which we all know goes on, the caste. Now, personally, I find that a bit distasteful, but that's their private life. That's their private life, and I don't think as a kind of balancing act, the state should be getting involved in that. But when it comes to the public aspects, employment and the provision of goods and services, it should be against the law to discriminate against someone based on their caste. And that is the red herring that some Hindus in the United Kingdom push. You want to stop me saying who my daughter can marry? Well, no, I don't. Well, actually, I think your daughter ought to be able to decide herself who she marries, but that's a slightly separate issue. It's to do with whether it's in employment or the provision of goods and services. It's not this legislation and interference in private life. Now, in terms of Dr. Ambedkar, and we're celebrating the 126th birth anniversary of one of the great men of history, Lord Parekh rightly asked, why is he not as well known in the West as Martin Luther King? Well, Martin Luther King was a better orator in English than Dr. Ambedkar. More modern, so we got the I Have a Dream clip on TV from 1963 or whenever it was at the Washington Monument there. And the Americans always publicize their own. But I agree that Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, is a world figure, and he will be seen, I think, eventually, as at least as important as Karl Marx, for this reason, that Karl Marx was reductionist. He thought and wrote about human relations, reducing them to class and economic relations, which is important. But he overlooked the aspect, Marx overlooked the aspect of human beings as social animals and the spiritual side of human beings, which Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar did not overlook that. And Dr. Ambedkar, I claim, in one sense, as a socialist. He wanted to tackle inequality through looking at causes and dealing with the causes, not just the symptoms. And Mahatma Gandhi, as far as and I'm not an expert on it, and people in this room are, as far as I can understand, was coming at it from the angle, well, casteism is okay, but caste-based discrimination, not sure about that, doesn't sound very good to me. Which is a very different approach, which is why, of course, Dr. Ambedkar converted with a mass conversion to Buddhism, because he saw, rightly or wrongly, that the straitjacket of traditional Hinduism would hold people back, and that one could not deal with the causes of casteism until one addressed the spiritual side and the social side of the human condition, as well as the economic relations as refracted through class. And I take very kindly what Lord Parrott said about careerists and what Dr. Ambedkar said about careerists. And if you'll forgive me, the Labour Party has an anthem called the Red Flag. And as is often the case with these things, there are alternative lyrics to that. And one of the alternative lyrics includes the line, "The working class can kiss my arse, I've got the foreman's job at last." And that is about careerists who climb up the ladder and then forget where they came from. And it happens too often in politics and society. And the reason I am, in one sense, although not an expert, certainly much more of an Ambedkarite than I am a Marxist, is because of what he said about the human condition and the spiritual side. It's not just about economics. And I agree with his approach in terms of educate, organise and agitate. Thank you.
Something very, very detailed and informative and helpful. And perhaps all of us can wish you well for the future, because Rob is, as I understand it, it's public knowledge now, is not standing again.
I'm retiring.
And will be a very great loss, particularly, of course, to this cause. We're very, very sorry. I hope that you will be able to prime a few protégés to carry on the good work in the Commons.
Does everybody know about the thing which has been set up to collect information?
Yes, we were talking about, we had a big session on that.
Good.
Yes.
Because,
Santos did a big...
Because if we don't get enough evidence, we've lost it.
Yes, Santos was talking about that. Well, we're fortunate. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. I realise that some people have come from a very long way to be with us, and we're very, very grateful that you have actually put that time and energy and expense into coming to be here. Thank our speakers. I think we've had a truly remarkable meeting. I don't think this has been a meeting like any other meeting. I think that we've had some extraordinary, well-informed and powerful statements, which are very well worth having on the record if we can. I think we've been very, very privileged indeed. And we've got one final privilege before us, because we have with us a Buddhist monk, the Venerable Sadamanthan Mahatthara, who was not only ordained as a monk in 1960, but he was with Dr. Ambedkar at the mass conversion in 1956. would like to give us his blessing. So if people were happy, we're happy to receive your blessing.
दुर्लभो पुरी साजयो न सो सबथ जायति यथा जायति सो धीरो तंकुलं सुखमेदति भवतु सर्वमंगलं रक्षन्तु सर्वदेवता सर्वबुद्धानुभावेन सदा सोत्थी भवन्तु ते भवतु सर्वमंगलं रक्षन्तु सर्वदेवता सर्वधर्मानुभावेन सदा सोत्थी भवन्तु ते भवतु सर्वमंगलं रक्षन्तु सर्वदेवता सर्वसंघानुभावेन सदा सोत्थी भवन्तु ते।
जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर जगज्जननेता अंबेडकर भवितकु मार्गम अंबेडकर बडुगुలకు ప్రాణం अंबेडकर जागो रे जागो अंबेडकर जगज्जननेता अंबेडकर भवितकु मार्गम अंबेडकर बडुगुలకు
बाबा साहब के मिशन में तुम्हें आना पड़ेगा, लेने को सहारा तुम्हें आना पड़ेगा, लेने को सहारा। बौद्ध धर्म है इतना प्यारा, दूर भरम हो मन का सारा। बाबा साहब के मिशन में तुम्हें आना पड़ेगा, लेने को सहारा तुम्हें आना पड़ेगा, लेने को सहारा। बौद्ध धर्म है इतना प्यारा।
ये आदर्श जाटव कल्याण समिति काशीपुर उत्तराखंड के अध्यक्ष महोदय श्रद्धेय कृपाल सिंह एवं सचिव महोदय श्रद्धेय धन सिंह एवं मास्टर नीरज सिंह जी, ये सभी सदस्य 2-2 हजार रुपए से हमारी टीम का हौसला बढ़ाते हैं। हम तहे दिल से इनका शुक्रिया अदा करते हैं। धन्यवाद।
जितनी इसमें सभ्यता उतनी मानवता, उतनी मानवता। इसमें प्रेम ही प्रेम है, नहीं है दानवता, नहीं है दानवता। करुणा मैत्री भाईचारा, इसमें सब धर्मों से न्यारा। बाबा साहब के मिशन में
निदेशालय सिंचाई विभाग हसनपुर और उन्हीं की पत्नी ग्राम प्रधान भावली उर्मिला देवी, ये दोनों सदस्य 2,000 रुपए से हमारी टीम का हौसला बढ़ाते हैं। धन्यवाद।
जिसे बुद्ध का ज्ञान हुआ